Hello, and welcome back to episode 2 of my The Last of Us review here on the RealDanBennett YouTube channel. Again, my name is Dan Bennett. If you are joining for the first time, thank you. We are going to jump into a review of episode 2 of the HBO Max television show The Last of Us. Before I get into the review, I do want to just touch base on the passing of Annie Wersching, the motion capture and voice actress for Tess in the original video game. My personal exposure to Annie as a live-action actor came from the show Timeless, and I've seen her in several things other than that at this point. But my first overall exposure was, in fact, to her as Tess, and so rest in peace to Annie Wersching. In honor of episode 2, I decided to emulate Ellie from The Last of Us Part 2 with cosplay that I put together for Los Angeles Comic-Con a couple years ago. So that is what I'm wearing today. But as for the review, let's go ahead and get into it. We start the episode in Jakarta, Indonesia, and mycologist Ratna Pertiwi is picked up by a member of the military and taken to a compound. Cordyceps don't thrive in human beings, she tells them, and they go, well, surprise! The military general takes her to what is presumed to be our first documented infected case. And you see a bite mark on the woman's leg, and Ratna takes a scalpel, cuts it open, and we see fragments of the cordyceps infection from the initial bite growing in the leg. Now, the unsettling part about this whole thing is that gives us this very grotesque visualization that we haven't necessarily had to face in either the TV show or the game up to this moment. It's easy to just sort of not think about that, but then you see this and you have to think about the fact that this fungus gets into your leg. And then, as long as you're alive, one would imagine you can probably feel some sort of sensation as it progresses through your body. And you may not necessarily, especially in the context of this unprecedented event, know what you're dealing with. And then it finally gets to your brain, and that's when it ultimately takes over. And that is a horrifying thought, to get to see that up close and personal in this episode. The showrunners went above and beyond to really continue to literally put this in our brains. Ratna tells the military gentleman, just like we kind of got in episode 1, there's nothing we can do. Like, the only way you can really fix this is bomb everything. But then we jump back to what I suppose we could call present day. Ellie is sleeping, and Joel and Tess are still keeping tabs on her. She wakes up and they start talking, and we get to see some of Ellie's trademark quippy attitude. They ask her how she was being tested by the Fireflies, and she says, well, they had me count from 1 to 10, but I think that the most impressive thing to them was the fact that I didn't turn into a fucking monster. And that is a perfect representation of this character. And so Bella has been doing a great job so far in channeling this angst that comes with this girl who is probably struggling with survivor's guilt. Joel's skepticism is still holding on in this moment, but we get a conversation between Ellie and Tess where we get to really understand the true purpose of this journey that they've been sent on. Ellie's infection and her immunity might be the key to curing this. We head out into Boston proper, and the musical score, as soon as they leave their shelter, underscores the dreariness of this world beautifully. As we saw in episode 1, as we've seen in this scene, and then as we continue to see throughout the rest of the episode, it seems like a pretty safe bet that this is going to be pretty consistent. Joel, begrudgingly at Tess's urging, agrees to head on to the State House. We get a little bit more backstory on Ellie. Tess probes Ellie a little bit in terms of, oh, well, how did you get bitten? And Ellie starts to tell her, but she holds back sort of a half-truth from her. And once we get into the city, we see a giant crater in the ground that Ellie asks, is this where they bombed the city? You see the destruction. You see two skyscraper-esque buildings collapsed and kind of falling into each other, and just how overgrown the city has become with no people. So we get to a hotel that's run down and flooded and overrun that it seems Tess and Joel have passed through previously. But we get to see a little bit more of Ellie's immaturity, because she's still a child. Her survivability, if she were on her own, is suspect. We get a conversation between Joel and Ellie that gives us our first real insight into the relationship that could be. Ellie needs to learn how to survive, and Joel needs to learn how to soften a little bit. We get to a balcony where we can see the easy path that they allude to versus the longer path to the State House. And the unfortunate side is this isn't going to fly, because down on the ground you see just piles, mounds of infected kind of crawling and wriggling. Tess explains to Ellie the nature of the infected and the fungus and how it creates this widespread network throughout the places that it takes over. And so the infected here can be triggered by something a distance away, which is foreshadowing to later in the episode. So Tess imparts her familiarity and her wisdom on this 14-year-old girl to hopefully help future-proof her going forward. So with this path blocked, they end up deciding that they need to go to the museum. As they walk inside, and they come around a corner, and there's a body. And it has been freshly killed in a way that is not consistent with your typical infected. They say, nope, we gotta stop talking. They don't give her any context. They just say, we're silent now. Psst. So obviously Ellie has to kind of just go with it. Well, we get our first visual introduction to the clickers. The clickers are the sort of marquee infected of the Last of Us video game. The cordyceps fungus has burst forth out of their heads. They cannot see anymore. They function using a form of echolocation. Now, the visual effects and the makeup that they implemented in these in the clickers and bringing them to life, just horrifyingly beautiful. The delicate nature and the movement from the performers brought these characters, these haunting, graphic characters, into reality. The clickers are the first step into a much larger, creepier world of the infected, which we haven't, outside of the teaser, haven't really gotten any actual exposure to yet. But I'm excited to see where it goes and to see what these showrunners and all the talented makeup and visual effects artists are able to do to bring this to life. Our characters ultimately do get out of it. They're able to pick off these two clickers and move on. During the tussle with the clickers, we see that Ellie has actually gotten scratched again, and she makes a joke about, well, if it had to happen to somebody. But so now we've got this explicit test of her immunity that one would assume would ultimately convince Joel that, okay, this is the real deal. Ellie and Joel cross a little wood bridge while Tess checks herself out, and they share another nice little warm moment where they're kind of looking over the city, and you've got this nice sunset, and Joel gets to, you get that small glimpse into what he can be. So we continue on to the State House, and when we arrive, we see that the people they're supposed to be meeting don't seem to be around. They head inside, and unfortunately, the Fireflies that were supposed to be helping get Ellie to where she needs to go, everyone's dead. And so then Joel and Tess are kind of faced with the reality that maybe they have to shoulder this burden. Tess kind of shows her hand a little bit, and Ellie puts together, oh shit, she's infected. So during this tussle with the clickers, Tess is also injured and is essentially doomed. She coerces Joel. She plays to his better nature and says, look, you need to do this. Joel's mulling this over when one of the bodies comes back to life and tries to attack them, but he kills it, and then you see little tendrils of the fungus come up. And then you see, across the city, the infected that we saw down blocking their path start to get up and go running toward where they were, which stresses that network of fungi. Joel and Ellie take off, and Tess starts flipping over these barrels of gasoline. The infected burst in through the front door of the state house, and one stops. And he kind of slowly turns toward Tess. And she's still trying to get the lighter to go as the gasoline covers the entire floor. And he walks over, and he gets real close. And he gives her the most unsettling and revolting kiss that I think I've ever seen in cinema and television ever. She finally gets the lighter to turn on, drops it, and the gasoline ignites. Joel, Ellie outside, the building explodes, and they just sort of look back at this fireball of Tessa's creation, and they feel a little sad, and then they prepare for the next stage of their journey, and the episode ends. And so that brings us to the end of episode 2. It was a great follow-up to the premiere. With new TV shows that have such a high level of anticipation, it's difficult to consistently fulfill that anticipation. And so far, we're 2 episodes in. On episode 3, I believe we're going to finally encounter Nick Offerman as Bill. He's a great actor. I'm excited to see that performance as well. This was a great second exposure to the world, and to have us thrust sort of in the deep end with the clickers is a great marquee moment, a great milestone for us to jump off of going into the rest of the season. Let me know your opinions on episode 2, your thoughts, your feelings, what you thought of that kiss at the end. Picking off one of our presumed main characters so early in the season. But go ahead and give me a like, subscribe, follow along with the rest of this season as well. I'm having fun doing these so far. Check in next week for episode 3. And when you're lost in the darkness, look for the light. Thank you. Bye.